For the smart and free thinking, welcome to Black Market Reads with your host, Lissa Jones.
Welcome to Black Market Reads, live from Majors and Quinn, independent booksellers in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, Lissa Jones, and today we are diving into a book that strips away the polite veneer of one of America's supposedly most progressive regions. Our guest is homegrown journalist Justin Ellis, here to reckon with a devastating paradox in his debut book, The Cruelty of Nice Folks: Why Minneapolis is the Story of America. Justin, welcome home.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Look at all of you. Wow. This is very surreal to just, number one, be back home, but also to be doing this here in a place where I have walked these stacks to buy books a number of times over the course of my life and over the course of writing this book. So it does feel like a homecoming, and nothing about this will ever stop feeling surreal as an experience. So I'm so happy that all of you are here today. I'm happy that I am here today, but especially that all of you are here.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and why don't we just go ahead and start with a reading?
Okay.
Thank you.
Here we go. 10 days later, the public works crews and police arrived to retake George Floyd Square. It was early. The crews had arrived around 4:30 a.m. with a small fleet of bobcats to begin moving the barriers blocking the street that fed into the intersection. They take the planters and portable toilets, the small plywood shacks that stood as guard posts. By the time I am speeding across town around 8 a.m., I've already missed much of their workday. They are an efficient group. Before long, the crews begin laying down markers for a bike lane once again. The caretakers and neighbors arrived at the memorial earlier, ready to fight. Some swoop in to grab flowers and art left on the ground in front of Cup Foods. Jay Webb, the gardener who took pride in the landscaping around the square, found workers trying to strip the garden plot at the base of the Black Power fist statue in the center of the intersection. Somehow, he is able to convince them to leave the ground undisturbed. As a consolation, or the payoff of a bleak promise, Jersey barriers are placed around the spot on the pavement where Floyd died. In the span of several hours, cars are loose on the street once again. When city workers eventually take their leave, community members use their own cars to block traffic, grabbing whatever they can find, traffic cones and chairs, garbage cans and wooden pallets, to close up all sides of the intersection once again. By the time most of Minneapolis wakes up, people in the square are raw. By mid-morning, it is already too hot, and the sun would only rise higher. Taking shelter under the awning of the People's Way, Webb stands on a bench processing and preaching to the crowd. The workers could never know all the work they had undone, the significance of all the repurposed materials used in building out the square, the pieces left over from the days after Floyd died. Eliza Wesley leads the chant, "South Side, we outside," and fists are raised in this air in solidarity. I stood on this ground a little over a week earlier with thousands of people who had made the pilgrimage in George Floyd's name. They had come to dance and eat. They had filled their phones with photos that would without a doubt be posted and reposted with thoughtful prose to travel far online. This was the process of keeping Floyd's memory alive. Weeks before that, the intersection had been bursting with people in the hours after Derek Chauvin was found guilty. And when the world wasn't watching, the city attempted to rebuild a bike lane on the same street where a black man died under a cop's knee. Thank you.
That was Justin Ellis. His book is The Cruelty of Nice Folks: Why Minneapolis is the Story of America. Thank you, Justin.
You're welcome.
Let's start, please, by unpacking the title. Why politeness is dangerous to Black survival. How do we contrast the Scandinavian utopia myth with the reality that Black Minnesotans were not stunned by George Floyd's murder in 2020?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that is honestly the the heart of what started me on this journey. These two things that existed at once, after Floyd was killed, this was a question that I was getting from people reaching out to me, texting me. It was also a question I was getting from editors who were like, would you like to write something about this? Which is a question Black journalists always get when someone is killed by police. And, the original piece that I wrote, the place that I got to, it was inevitable. This was an inevitability. And that's putting aside, obviously, Jamar Clark and so many other people who had died, Black men and women who died at the hands of police in Minneapolis and throughout the Twin Cities. I mean, obviously, Philando Castile was not that long before that. So how do you figure out these two things? How do you make sense of these two things? And for me, it's coming back to not just the fact that this veneer exists, this polite veneer of we're all getting along here, we're neighbors who make hot dish for each other, we shovel each other out, which is all very good and well-meaning and well-intentioned. But also, we do these things and we don't dig any deeper. We do these things and we do it at the expense of having more important conversations, hard conversations, raw conversations. And so I think that was the starting point for me. That was the jumping off point. Because to me, there was this other part that felt kind of unspoken that was actually more insidious, which was this idea that this is maybe a way of manufacturing what makes Minnesota good. This is a way of manufacturing this place where people want to live, this place that keeps making it onto the list of the most beautiful places and the most accessible places to live. That part of this was sort of manufactured, this lie.
And it's a lie we treasure, and we keep it up, and we put it in books, and we write it down, and we say it all kinds of places, but it's not true. What is this reality about the danger of white politeness to Black bodies?
The danger is basically in the fact that these cycles keep repeating, right? That at the time when Floyd died, I believe it was the 10th or 11th killing by police over like a decade. And the politeness, I think, to me, it comes from this place of, yes, we will go out, we recognize this is an injustice, we realize that a wrong has taken place, but after the march ends, everyone goes home and has dinner. And I think that's part of it. It's the fact that the world's attention was on Minneapolis after Floyd was killed. There was a lot of people that were checking Samuel Myers' work, the Minnesota Paradox, this like how do you reconcile these things, this history. And to me, he dug into a lot of it, but there was this part to me that really stuck, which is like the sense that so many Minnesotans could not really justify or account for sort of the embarrassment of riches that they enjoy. These things that you could not really account for if it wasn't for your family basically being here either since this place was founded or enjoying like the riches of post-war America and that turning into something like generational wealth. And the fact that that was not available to everybody. And so to me, it's not reckoning with that. And that part where it's just like, well, that's a real shame that happened. But what are you going to do about it? And I'm sorry if that's a clip, but the other part of it, frankly, though, is the ways in which, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, it's the ways in which Black life can at times be just disregarded, that it's disposable in some ways. Because it's not just cops killing Black men and women. It's the fact that our Black children are over-policed in schools. They are subject to so much surveillance and supervision that starts at an early age. And so that neglect, that willingness to say, well, these are tough things and we'll find a way to work through them, but also this belief that sort of sits at the same time that so much of this is in the past that's already settled. And that's the part that really feels hurtful, because I've had a lot of questions working on the book and now that it's out about sort of my experience growing up. And growing up in Minneapolis in the 80s and 90s, one of the things that I had to reckon with in this book is the fact that it felt like so much of civil rights and so much of black trauma was this thing that was a part of the settled past. You know, that like, well, we had this big fight over school desegregation in the 70s, and we did it. And Plymouth Avenue burned not once, but twice, and we got better. There have been bombings, there have been killings. We have turned much of near North Side into this complex, this warren, this maze of public housing. But then HUD came along and we fixed it, you know? And so it was this feeling that like, well, the work has been done, we've made progress, and making progress is as good as the real thing. And so I think it's the combination of those things that I think over time it snowballed for me. And honestly, it made me angrier as I wrote the book.
I'm so grateful for your courage, for saying it and for writing the book, because we won't get better till we say it. Till we say the truth, till we believe the truth, till we listen to each other, that this is not one Minnesota by any means. It depends on what you look like and where you live and how much money you have. Nobody wants to ask, what's it like to be the Negro problem, but we're not the problem.
That's 100% correct. And I really confronted that with how to end this book. And you know, it's a writer problem in general, just like how do you land the plane? I don't know, man. It's in the air, you got it there, and like, well, it's got to come down. But with so many books like this, or at least the genre of book that this book definitely gets put next to on the shelves, they are books where often it's sort of the last chapter, the final chapter is the conclusion has to be, and here's the way you fix it, you know? That whenever marginalized people of any stripe, whether you are writing about sexism, whether you are writing about hatred to queer people, whether it is about, you know, the atrocities that have happened to indigenous people, pick a marginalized group. You have to get to this point where it's like, and now let me tell you how to solve the problem that you have created us. Yeah. Right. And I think I got really fed up with that. And so to me, I knew that I had to end this book looking at the period of time that had happened from when it started, when I started this project, and then the period of time of research and writing, and also grieving, frankly, that I took in working on this, and reckoning with the fact that that act of persisting in this world, that act of living, that act that so many marginalized people have to go through every day, where it's like, you just got to get up and go on, is part of one of the biggest victories that you can have. And moreover, that you can't wait for the well-intentioned people to make up their minds that your life has value or to figure out how to save you.
You'll be dead by then.
You will be. Mm-hmm. You will be. And I mean, and that's the other reason that I came to that conclusion. Looking at 3 generations of my family, starting with my great-grandparents, my grandmother, my mom, and you just see these different eras of America trying to reach out, trying to broker some sort of solution for America's original sin. And it's shocking, you know? Like I wrote in this book that my great-grandparents came here as part of a great migration, right? Like that was like phase 1 of how America will get better. My grandmother comes into Minneapolis, comes into Jerome during the era after World War II, where it was going to be our great expansion era. My mom came of age during the Civil Rights era, and you know, all of these different milestones in American history that were supposed to be turning points, that never turned, that stayed on the same spot in the corner. So you look at that and you're just sort of saying, well, what choice do we have just to keep going? Because we can't wait for America, we can't wait for the people in power to make up their minds.
Thus the need for protest. We sit in the land of plenty right now, but Dave McCosker, they still are fighting the renaming of a lake that was named after a segregationist, holding steadfast to the idea that Minnesota is progressive, but we love our segregationists. Rather ridiculous. And Lake Harriet and Lake of the Isles and all the other lakes in the land of plenty where we were not able to buy homes by exclusion, mapping prejudice can give you the evidence and the receipts. You talk about Archie Given Sr. and the Tilson built homes, but let's talk about the idea that first we couldn't buy land here, so we can't transfer the wealth we see, and we can't hold the wealth that we see. So talk a little bit about what you wrote in the book, and then talk about what Archie Given Sr. tried to do, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, the Archie Given stories to me is fascinating in that it truly felt like something I should have been learning more when I was in school. And it was also mind-blowing to me because it was literally where I was growing up. On either side of the neighborhood where my grandmother's house was on 4th Avenue, that was it. That's where all the Tilson-built homes were created. But, you know, to me, there's the part that's damning, but also was so fascinating to me is that there's these different stories that pop up now in the present or, you know, the last 2 decades when people go back and look at the past and actually dig into the things that happened around housing. Mapping Prejudice, fantastic work. I would not be here without them. Literally sharing their research, what changed the direction of what I was able to do. But these stories that pop up from time to time and people are shocked and it's like, well, this history was there, you know? You look at the Simpson family, which was around the turn of the century over by the University of Minnesota campus, where in the most Minnesota like protest possible, you have a bunch of irate white neighbors who show up with a strongly worded letter to this black family to say, hey, we have all decided that actually it would be in the best interest of the neighborhood if y'all moved someplace else. And there's so many of these types of stories and all these different types of tactics. Sometimes it was just they would try to make a bigger offer. They would be like, we will give you like $500, $1,000 more than like you paid for this place if you just leave. One of the other notable ones, obviously the Lee household over, again, in the central neighborhood where this family, all the Lees wanted to do, they move over onto Columbus Avenue. All they wanted to do is they just wanted their little girl to go to field. And you end up with people on their lawn night after night poisoning their dog. Poisoning their dog. And so there's so many of those types of stories. Like if you spent enough time going through the Star Tribune's archives, if you spent enough time going through the archives of the State Human Rights Department, the city's Human Rights Department, and I have gone through many of these, there's so many of these cases that are just sort of swept under the rug. And sometimes it's just as simple as like, this house got egged. This house had a bag of flaming human shit on the front door, you know, like all these things, all these signs that just say you're not wanted here, you're not supposed to be here, you're in the wrong place. Maybe you're in the wrong place just by a few blocks. And so that's part of what I think was so interesting about the Tilson Built Homes project. Like it was built interesting in a number of ways. Number one, that there was a home builder, a white man that was like, yes, you know what? I will work with you. I will connect with you on this project because we should do this, because this is the right thing to do. And because I don't see, you know, in some ways you could say it's a very capitalist answer, but like sometimes capitalism can win that way where it's like, listen, black folks got to buy homes too. So why not me? But I also think the thing that to me felt like it was the most revolutionary was that it was basically creating more or less like a tidal wave for that neighborhood. So instead of angry neighbors, instead of bigots being able to pick off families one by one, it was all of a sudden there was going to be just an entire neighborhood there of striving middle-class black families. And you can't do anything about that. You could try, but the numbers are against you. And so that was deeply, deeply fascinating to me. And the fact that Archie Givens was out there just basically hustling and doing it for himself. It's an idea that just started from being at a meeting in a place at the right time, hearing somebody from HUD and the Federal Housing Authority saying, hey, we would really like to find more opportunities to have black home buyers. And then having the hindsight of finding an ad in the Spokesman where someone was like, I'm just going to dump all this land. I need to sell this land. Like, he did that. He did that. And so it's an incredible story that I think should be in more history books, because it's this idea of like, what is the settled past, and the fact that we have supposedly done so much as a society. For me, growing up in that neighborhood would be to think, oh, well, everybody just lives here because this is where their families could afford to live. The people that lived on either side of my grandmother's house, and not knowing that, like, what it took just for them to be there. People whose houses I ran through, whose backyards I played in. Like, it's an incredible story.
I'm so thankful that you talked about him and about his legacy. The Givens Foundation is actually named the Archie Sr. and Phoebe Mae Givens Foundation for African American Literature. He was the founder of the foundation that is hosting this podcast. In 1972, he would ask the kids in the neighborhood, "What are you reading?" My father is 78 years old. He lived there. And a couple weeks ago, I was at St. Peter AME, right on the block, and they were asking, "What are you reading?" and saying that Archie Givens couldn't be played. You couldn't say what you were reading because he would ask a follow-up question. So you really had to be reading. So Roxanne says thank you.
Oh, that's very sweet. That is so sweet.
It means the most. Thank you. Can you talk about the personal cost of white politeness to your family and what it cost you?
That's a good question, and I struggled with that part a lot. I struggled with where I was in this book. You know, I started this book in 2021, and obviously the world was so different then, and the story of what was happening with George Floyd in Minneapolis was like still developing at that time. And so I didn't really know how I fit into the story because I was trying to do something originally that was much more of a history book. I thought that I could write about Zebulon Pike and Hubert Humphrey and what happened on Plymouth Ave and like all these points across time. But the thing that they always tell you when you work on a book project is like you've got to write something that would at least be interesting to you, something that you would want to read. And it felt like I was putting so much history in that there was something that was missing. And it was also taking time to get into the story. And at the same time, I'm seeing all of these stories about all the things that other black families had been going through, families who started over in the near north, you know, on 6th Ave and places like that, families who sent their kids to Phyllis Wheatley, people who grew up in Sumner Field homes, people whose kids went to the Way, people who remember when Prince was a real hooper at Central. Just along the way, I'm just like, this maps with my family story. This maps with my life. And I was very, very reticent to put myself in the story at first. And it was thanks to my editor, but also thanks to my wife for saying, there's a Justin-sized hole in this story. And so I had to go back. I had to try to piece together this incomplete puzzle in this way that I think is so familiar to many black families, where it's like, what you have maybe in your family are fables. What you have is a lot of lore. You might not have the actual specifics. You might not have documentation. You might only have breadcrumbs. And then you go to all of our historical resources. You go to our archives, and you find them wanting. I had to use sort of the bare bones that I could find and map those onto the things that my mom, my uncle, others in my family could tell me. And, you know, there's a part of that where you're just like, I have to sit with some of this unknowing. But I also have to sit with the fact that unknowing is so often a part of the story of being black in America. That unknowing, but also that act of reinvention. Like when I look at my great-grandparents, my grandmother, my mom, this fact that it's like you have these gaps in your story. But what are you going to make with it? What are you going to do? What do you do with what happens now? What are you going to make for your family? So that was a huge, huge struggle for me. And it wasn't until very later in the book, and I tried to write this out in some of the later chapters, that it really struck me that this is also the ways in which white supremacy is this really insidious thing. Because for me, chronicling this story where I look at my family, and what I do know is that it's generation after generation that worked hard just to provide, to be able to do what they can, to take care of each other. And I'll admit that there's a part of me that looked at that and said, well, I don't know if that's special. And it made me realize that is part of the way that white supremacy works. Because every black family is a success story. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of celebrating in spite of whatever the world throws at you. But this idea that again, you get plaques if you get killed. You get plaques if something horrible happens. You get statues if something horrible happens. You don't, my mom's not going to get a park bench named after her. I mean, I could buy a park bench and name it after her. She would love that, frankly. She would say, actually, you could do better than a park bench. For the folks here that knew my mom, she would say, you could probably do better than that. You could do better than that. But that's, again, like part of the process of writing and like digging these things out of me was just these parts of me that I did not know were there. And as I've said, part of it was getting angrier and angrier. But it's because of spending so much time with this material and also writing this book over this last 5-year period in America where, I don't know, it hasn't turned out great, has it? So those things together, I mean, to that question, I would say that it affected my family in the ways that it affected so many black families here, that you don't necessarily have to be chased down by the mob or by the law to have your life affected in some way. The fact that the pattern in which my family moved around the city was so clearly defined by the various mechanisms of segregation and white supremacy, talking about living in Sumner Field homes, talking about moving over to the South Side, as my grandmother did eventually, to this strip of land that on any HUD map or Federal Housing Authority map from the 1940s and 50s would say, this is the most undesirable land. Stay away from this area. You do not want to live here because of the people that are here. But those people moved in and look what they made. Look what they made. That is the ways that our lives were affected. The schools that we got to go in, that some of our family in that got closed down, schools that have been destroyed. All of those things are the legacy of the ways that discrimination and white supremacy worked in Minnesota.
And still work. In Minnesota. Mm-hmm. What do you think has actually changed in the daily fabric of the city now that you're back home for a minute?
What has changed? Well, I don't need to sit up here and lecture at length about Operation Metro Surge to everybody here. That is what changed. It was fascinating to see just how much you could damage the psyche of a city, damage the people, and change its course in some ways. People, I cannot iterate enough. I finished this book by January of this year. Like over the holidays, my wife could tell you, like reading the proofs, doing fact checking, this thing was done, sent off in January. And then the current occupant of the White House decided he wanted to pick some fights, and ICE shows up. And then they show up even more. And my editor was like, you gotta do something. We can't have this book go out into the world. People are gonna wonder, like, what is he thinking? What happens next? So I had to work in a very short amount of time to write an epilogue to cover some of the ground of what was happening at a point when obviously everything was chaotic and nothing felt settled. So all of that is to say, I think what has changed is that the trauma of what happened with George Floyd in some ways was isolated. It was this seismic thing. It was a shockwave that hit the city. It was also this seismic thing, I think, that was also put on the city by the world's attention. And the argument that I make in the book, and that I do believe, is that you saw that not just in the protests, the arc that happened with the protests, Derek Chauvin being convicted, and then the policing referendum, where this rubber band of the status quo that we have seen over and over in history in this place snapped back once again. And then for 5 years, nothing, right? Nothing. And then in January, people start disappearing from the streets. And then in January, people decide that they're going to actually start chasing down chasing down ICE agents. And then they kill 2 Minnesotans for no good reason, for simply just what in other times they would say was standing their ground. There was a point in this country where that was a thing that some people said was to be respected. So what feels different to me, that definitely is a big difference. I think the thing that I feel like I see, is this growing impatience with the status quo and specifically the systems of power that exist. Because to me, one of the most fascinating parts of what happened in January and February was how it laid bare the power structures that exist here, whether it is we're talking about local political machine, obviously the police department, these places where everyone was like, our hands are tied, which is why you have people out in the streets taking care of each other, feeding each other, making sure your kids get to school. But then these structures that are supposed to be in place to provide all these things are silent or just neutered in one way or the other. And it feels like there's a growing impatience with that, to say nothing of the fact that it feels like the politics of the populace have continued to just go completely more left and saying that we can't do more of the same old. So that feels different. I think to me, that does feel different, but the part that I continue to be curious about is what does going back to normal look like? Because I've already had different conversations and heard other things about the need to put out the fires that were still burning from what happened earlier this year, which is not to say that repairing isn't important. It is, obviously, but I think what became clear to me in writing this book is that there's always this process of picking what are priorities, what are the winners, and who are going to be, just because they are not a priority, the losers. That gets sorted after these big events. And that's where I don't know what happens next.
I really thank you. You know, it strikes me that when we were protesting against the murder of George Floyd, it was co-opted and things were burned and all kinds of things were blamed on Black people who didn't have anything to do with it. And then here they came singing Kumbaya for all the reasons of Metro Surge, no disrespect, and they win an award. And I just asked myself, but what about what happened in the intervening period? Did anything ever get better for Black people? Did anything ever get improved? And it didn't, but now you protested and now you won an award, so now we're going to continue the lie with an award.
And a song from Bruce Springsteen. Did you hear that?
We got a song.
The Boss.
We got a song. Where do we go from here?
I mean, if I knew that, I would be getting some sort of MacArthur Genius Grant, I would hope.
You very well might. Speak your piece.
I'm just trying to sell a book. I'm just a simple kid who grew up on 4th Avenue. I don't know where things go. During the process of this research, there's so many people from the various academic institutions and other places in the Twin Cities that I owe a debt to this. But I had a conversation one time with Brittany Lewis, and you know, she's been doing a lot of interesting work for a while now that looks at how you do this work in community, how you build bonds, how you repair harm. And I remember in one of the conversations that I had, she said this thing that stuck with me about, you know, you have to be able to sort of sit down with people and talk to them about the past, talk to them about wrongs and hurt in ways that are not, and I'm paraphrasing, but in ways that aren't personal or targeted or hurtful in ways, you know. And I think to me, I was just like, I don't know if I can do that. I'm too petty, you know. I've got that part of my mom in me. Like, I don't know if I can do that. But I understand that impulse, like to say in order to build the shared future, you have to have a foundation that everyone agrees upon. And also, I think what she's saying in that is that you have to be able to do things in a way where people actually willingly want to come to the table. So that's saying that you can't finger wag, that you can't attack or blame. And I think that's true. But I think also having those hurt feelings has to be a part of it. You know, saying like, listen, you yourself maybe did not put on a white robe and go out and put something on somebody's lawn. Fair play. But at the same time, how have you and your family benefited over decades? I remember when I was here in 2021, but I will never forget, I was talking to a class at Hamlin, and there was a question from someone at the end that was similar to this about, like, well, what do you think we should do? What do we do? And this is, again, the city is still in the grips of, like, recovering and figuring out what is going to happen after Floyd. And I was like, I don't know, a starting point could be just finding ways to better share power. Like, let's think about the ways that power is concentrated in this city, not just in terms of politics, but also in terms of capital, but also in terms of just like where are the various centers in the Twin Cities where people invest, where people are important. You know, I grew up on the South Side, and being back here, there are times when I still drive around parts of the South Side and I'm just like, these areas have always been important. And these areas look it. And to me, that's a kind of soft power that's not equally shared. I wrote in this book that, like, people have had plans for 38th and Chicago for so long. So long. People had plans for parts of the North Side for so long. And there's no interest in that. So, like, when I say sharing power, that is part of it. It is about what is important and about who is important, about what gets invested in, and also what gets invested in ways that ultimately aren't fickle or at the whims of charity or arch capitalists who say, well, we're going to kneel for about a year and a half, and then if anybody uses the word DEI, we are going to look the other way and take the check and rip it up. So I think that's what it comes down to, at least to me.
Mm-hmm. I deeply appreciate it, and thank you for the book. Toni Morrison said, whenever it comes to writing about Black people, it seems as if our stories were written in invisible ink. So thank you for writing them in black ink.
Whew. Wow, thank you. That is a lovely thing to say. I can only hope that you can say that I am in conversation with Toni Morrison.
The book is The Cruelty of Nice Folks: Why Minneapolis is the Story of America by Justin Ellis. A huge thank you to our partners, Majors and Quinn, for hosting us, and to the Minnesota Regional Arts Council, MRAC, for their generous support in making this conversation possible. If you're here, please don't leave without buying your copy. And wherever you are, thank you for supporting independent bookstores and Black literary culture. Black Market Reads is a product of the Givens Foundation for African American Literature, produced in partnership with iDream.tv. Find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts and on blackmarketreads.com with Go Deeper bonus content. Let's give it up one more time for the home talent, Justin Ellis.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm your host, Lissa Jones, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much.
You're listening to Black Market Reads, a series of conversations highlighting the Black literary voices of today. Join the conversation. For more great content about authors you love, visit us at blackmarketreads.com. Your opinion counts. Let us know what you think. Share us with your friends. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts.